Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope you're having a lovely day. So I'm going to tie together maybe 3 to 4 topics in today's rant video. My apologies for this not flowing the way other videos usually do. Today I want to talk about a couple of things, and we're going to start off with this article from Bloomberg that says Apple is limiting iPhone file sharing tools used for protests in China. The company is putting a 10-minute cap on receiving files in AirDrop. The change is made in China but will eventually expand globally. Now, regardless of whether this feature expands globally, I find it very interesting that a feature that is utilized amongst protesters to share information in an authoritarian regime just so happens to get limited while they're using it in their country. That's a very funny coincidence. The same way it's a funny coincidence that it's more difficult to use a VPN on an iPhone in that area. The same way it's a funny coincidence that users in Hong Kong lost access to a Taiwanese flag emoji that I can still use in America if I were unlucky enough to use an iPhone. Just all these weird little coincidences when it comes to time and region to how Apple sets their policy. I'm sure that this is going to expand globally the same way the limiting of the Taiwanese flag is going to expand globally. Anyway, there is legitimate reason for concern when it comes to this particular feature. As much as I dislike Apple, and if you're new to the channel, just type Louis Rossman Apple into YouTube. Trust me, my bias is not pro-Apple. There is some reason for concern over this feature. There's this news article from Fox. Panic on planes after images are airdropped to passengers. Somebody was airdropping images to passengers that said things like, a plane jacking will happen soon. 2 hours and 37 minutes it will start in the front of aisle 6. This is obviously going to cause issues, and especially if you're able to do that, or you're able to airdrop nude images to random other people on a plane. If you have a feature that is being used on phones that tend to be the phone of choice for people who are less tech savvy, that is going to be, like, you may want to change some of the default settings or this, that, and the other. So you have less news articles like this coming out where, people are afraid that there's going to be a plane jacking because someone shares an image that they shouldn't be with people around them that may not have the settings on their phone set properly to avoid that kind of crap. That being said, it's just really funny that you choose to limit that feature at this time in this particular country. Something I've talked about on this channel many times, whether earlier this year with Quanta or last week with Foxconn, is there were a lot of protests breaking out in China because people are tired of this zero COVID bullshit. They are tired of closed-loop production systems, or as I prefer to call it, slavery, where you can't leave work because your employer and your government said you can't, to keep the closed-loop system to try and eliminate spread of COVID under the if it saves just one life fallacy, or what I like to call the Cuomo doctrine. The idea that you have to do whatever it is in your power to ensure that there are less cases of COVID. Who cares? If your workers, as mentioned in the Foxconn article, are stuck eating bread and drinking stale milk, who cares if they're not able to get access to their medicine? Who cares if they can't see their family? Who cares if people get stuck in deadly apartment fires that they can't get out of because they're stuck in these shitty fucking lockdowns? Who cares? Because we got our COVID cases lower. People are getting sick and tired of all that bullshit. They're getting sick and tired of this idea that we are not going to care about any other metric of happiness or quality of our life or freedom. We are going to focus on less cases. And the incentive structure in China is set up so that people care about less cases. This is what's going to happen as long as the only thing we care about are less cases, less cases, less cases. Flatten the curve, stop the spread. It says here, most local jurisdictions are in charge of their own COVID enforcement, and the officials' jobs are on the line if they mismanage an outbreak, leading them to err on the side of harsher measures no matter the effect on residents. Does that sound familiar to anybody that lived in New York in April of 2020? But this is a serious issue, and I understand why it is that people are getting sick and tired of it. And as they are protesting these things, it really does suck when the world's largest technology company decides that they are going to stop the ability of people to easily share files in the particular authoritarian region that these protests are occurring in. Yeah, sure, I'm sure you're going to spread this to the rest of the world. This is eventually going to expand globally. But you started it there. That's some weird fucking timing, man. Apple finds themselves in a genuinely serious predicament here because Apple is not able to just say, well, we're not going to sell in China. Fine. They don't want us to have the AirDrop feature be as prominent as it is. We're just not going to sell it. We'll lose the couple of $1 billion a year. They lose everything. Apple has most of their production and manufacturing of their products done in China, and I imagine part of the reason that they do that is because it is easier to make more money when you have people that are working under slave labor-ish conditions making your products. So it's not like they can say, well, fine, we'll just lose the money from having the products sold in the Chinese market. Whatever. It sucks, but we at least have the rest of the world. The products are made there. And the Chinese government could very easily make it very difficult for Apple if they decide to do things like make it easy to use a VPN, include the Taiwanese flag emojis, or make it easy for people to use AirDrop during protests. And Apple kind of understands that as much as they like to talk a good game when it comes to social justice and social equity and all these other issues and blah, 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 and caring about democracy and all this other crap that they virtue signal about, at the end of the day, they don't give a fuck. Because if they did, they would start moving this production to other countries that are not run by cunts like Xi Jinping. And the problem that you have here is that they haven't done that. As a result of not having done that a long time ago, when maybe it would have been a good time to start transitioning over, they're in a position where if they wanted to do that, they'd have to transition over really fast, and they can't do that. They can't transition out of the country fast enough to be able to avoid the wrath of what might happen if they make it more difficult for the Chinese government to keep a vice grip on their population. And to be clear, I understand that many companies will happily manufacture products in China, that Apple is not the only one. However, Apple having the highest market cap of virtually any company in the world and more cash reserves than virtually anybody else means that if anybody has the resources to be able to do this, it's you. The reason that Apple gets that level of criticism is because they are in the best position from their net profits, from their cash reserves, from their market cap to be able to make that transition somewhere else. If anybody can do it, if anybody could start doing that, it's them. And while they've started to try moving some of it to some other countries in India, they haven't done enough quickly enough. And with the amount of money they have and the amount of influence they wield, in my opinion, that is shameful. This is something I think they could have started doing 6 or 10 years ago, and had they started to get it under control back then, they wouldn't be in the position that they are now. And yeah, that's going to be kind of awkward. I mean, moving your production to other countries very quickly, right before what appears to be an oncoming global recession, yeah. Apple doesn't have an easy time set out for themselves. But I want people to remember things like this. I really do. I genuinely want people to remember these types of instances the next time Tim Cook tries to talk about some social or political issue in America. Just remember stuff like this. Remember the things that he did at these times when there's any sort of lecturing regarding your political views, your beliefs, or anything else. And be thankful that there was enough pushback in our country that something like this is not going on here. Again, a lot of people are going to be mad. You're going to see a lot of angry comments, and I honestly don't care. Because when I said in 2020, if it saves just one life is a dangerous, demagoguish position to take, a lot of people got mad at me for it. But this is the end result of that. The end result, if you genuinely believe, though, if it saves just one life, regardless of any of the consequences, you end up with this. And at the end of the day, even in an authoritarian country like China, where people are scared to even say the words Tiananmen Square, they've had enough of this shit. And good for them. I hope all these people protest and get the freedom that they're asking for. I genuinely do. This stuff honestly just drives me insane. Like, the thing that drove me the most insane in 2020 was, as it says here, the if it saves just one life fallacy. Like, fundamentally, this is not how we have ever made decisions about anything. By all means, be a sensible human being. In my store, we wore masks in early March of 2020 before it was cool. I got a vaccine. Everybody at my store got a vaccine. We did not go to any sort of raves. We weren't going out getting drunk every night at places that had thousands of people. We behaved sensibly for a pandemic. That being said, that's different from a closed-loop production system where people are eating bread and drinking stale milk, of people getting stuck in their apartment buildings, of people in Rhode Island that had police cruisers turning on their sirens because somebody was jogging by themselves, or our lovely governor getting pissed off at our sheriff's office because on Thanksgiving they didn't want to go door-to-door knocking to figure out if you had one more person than you were supposed to in your house on a holiday so that they could arrest you. Red fucking QR codes that take away your ability to live your life as a normal human being. Because that is where this shit ends. There comes a point where the if it saves only one life thing starts to get a little old. And yes, even in an authoritarian country like China, after 2.5 years of that shit, and being able to look around and see, the rest of the world's not doing what we're doing and they seem to be okay, it really does kind of take the mask off, no pun intended, and make them realize, well, shit, why are we putting up with this crap? And that's a fair thing to ask. This is where that ends. If it just saves one life, if it saves even one person from getting COVID, then screw everything else. This is the extreme version of that. I'm happy to see that citizens in China are pushing back against it. And the silver lining, the one good thing that may come out of this complete and utter disaster, is that people in China will start protesting more and more and demand their voices be heard in terms of not having an authoritarian government that has the ability to clamp down on their freedom in that particular manner. One of the things that drove me the most nuts in 2020 was the whole, like, when people started measuring COVID deaths. And you have different units of measurement. You have kilograms, you have pounds, you have liters, and then you had 9/11s. You would have people say, like, there's a 9/11 happening every month in our state. There's a 9/11 happening every week or so on and so forth. One of the things that I hated the most about people using 9/11s as a unit of measurement for COVID cases or deaths when trying to justify further lockdowns, it's being done for the emotional impact. It's being done to pull at your heartstrings so that you make bad decisions that don't take into account a multivariate analysis, just this univariate analysis of lower the cases. Because if you look right now in America, I mean, like, we do have, 300, 400, 200 average deaths per day from COVID. I mean, if it saves only one life, okay, why are we not shutting things down more? Why are we not stopping this? We have, it looks like 40,000 new cases a day, 200 to 400 deaths per day. That's a 9/11 every 10 days. Now, the obvious answer to that question is, well, Lewis, you idiot. You have no sense of nuance. Don't you understand that thousands of deaths a day is different than 200 deaths a day? Of course I do. Absolutely. However, the mantra of, quote, if it saves even just one life, then it's worth it, completely ignores that, because it doesn't matter if it's 200 deaths a day or 10,000. All that matters is if it saves one. This was horrible, horrible policy. And the end result of these types of demagogic statements is the type of garbage you see going on in China right now. And I'm happy, very happy, that they are starting to say, screw this, even if Apple doesn't want them to be able to share their message with their neighbors as easily. I'm very sorry that BlackBerry has been cropped a little out of the image. I wanted to get up and I wanted to move the camera a little bit to the right so that you'd be able to see BlackBerry. However, for me to get up to move the camera, I would have had to take Oreo off of my lap. So it really was a trade-off here. Do I want BlackBerry to be in the shot? I do, but I also don't want to disturb Oreo the cat, who's sitting in my lap. And if a cat is sitting in your lap, you don't get up. You don't pick the cat up. If a cat is sitting in your lap, you pet the cat. You pet the cat. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.